Welcome to one of the most unsettling cases recorded in history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. Today, we journey through one of the most disturbing cases in Kentucky's history. The year was 1903, and autumn had settled over Harlan County, Kentucky, with unusual bitterness. The mining town of Cumberland Gap sat nestled between rolling hills that seemed to swallow sound itself. To outsiders, it was just another coal town, dusty, poor, and forgotten. But locals knew better. They knew about the hollow beyond Raven, rock where the Hollow brothers once lived, a place where to this day not even hunters venture after sundown. County records from 1903 simply state that the Hollow family, Thomas and Elijah Hollow, were declared missing in November of that year. The investigation lasted precisely 3 weeks before being abruptly closed. No bodies were ever found. No suspects were ever named. The brothers' small cabin at the edge of Black Mountain Hollow was boarded up by county officials and left to rot. But what those official documents don't mention, what was deliberately omitted, was why the search parties refused to continue looking after the first week. Why the sheriff's handwriting becomes noticeably shaky in his final report. Why the entire town collectively decided never to speak of the Hollow brothers again. It was as if everyone silently agreed to forget, but some things refused to be forgotten. According to the Cumberland Gap Register, the Hollow brothers arrived in town around 1897 during the coal boom that transformed southeastern Kentucky. They were tall, gaunt men with identical features despite their 5-year age difference. Thomas, the elder at 36, spoke for them both, while Elijah, 31, rarely uttered more than a few words to anyone. They purchased a small plot of land far from town, built a modest cabin with their own hands, and kept largely to themselves. The deed of purchase recovered from county archives during a 1962 records digitization project reveals curious details about their acquisition. The land they chose had been owned by the Blackwood family, who abandoned it after a mining accident claimed 3 of their sons in 1889. The property had remained unclaimed for years, considered worthless due to its distance from town and proximity to what locals called the Bad Hollow, a narrow ravine where fog lingered year-round. The Hollow brothers purchased it for a nominal sum, paying with freshly minted coins that the clerk noted were cold to the touch, as if stored underground. Their arrival coincided with a period of rapid expansion for Cumberland Gap. The Louisville and Nashville Railroad had extended lines into the region, bringing industrial-scale coal mining and a flood of workers from across the Appalachian region. The town's population tripled between 1895 and 1900. In this chaos of new faces and opportunities, the Hollow brothers should have been unremarkable, yet from the beginning, something about them set them apart. A ledger from Walsh's General, store dated September 1897, notes, Newman T. and E. Hollow purchased supplies today. Unusual selections, 40 lb of salt, no food items, requested old maps of the region, specifically inquiring about cave systems. E. Hollow stood watching the street the entire time, while T. conducted business. Neither removed their hats. The brothers worked in the Blue Diamond mine, taking the night shifts that most men avoided. Their foreman, Jacob Whitley, noted in his employment ledger that they were exceptional workers, tireless but unsettling to other men, request they continue on night. Rotation. The brothers never missed a day, never complained about the dangerous conditions, and saved nearly every penny they earned. Whitley's personal journal, discovered in 1965 during the estate sale of his grandson, provides more candid observations. The Hollow men work like no miners I've seen. They require minimal light, move through the narrowest tunnels with ease, and seem to sense where the coal seams run before we open them. The other men won't work alongside them anymore, claim their picks strike the rock in perfect unison, no matter how far apart they work. like they share one mind between two bodies. What makes their case particularly strange is how little they seem to exist beyond their work. No church records mention them, despite religion being central to community life. No receipts from the general store beyond the absolute essentials. The town photographer Samuel Burke claimed the brothers actively refused to be captured in any group photographs of the mining crews. The only known image of either brother is a blurry background figure in an 1899 town gathering where a tall, thin shadow stands at the very edge of the frame, face turned away from the camera. This photographic anomaly was analyzed by imaging specialists from the University of Kentucky in 1967. Their report states, the figure appears unusually elongated, approximately 15 to 20% taller than surrounding individuals. More notable is the unusual light absorption around the figure. The shadow cast appears to bend in physically impossible ways, and the grain of the photograph is disrupted in a pattern consistent with extreme temperature exposure, though only in that specific area. By all accounts, the Hollow brothers were quiet, hard-working men who should have faded into the background of history. Instead, they became the center of what old-timers would later call the silence that saved Cumberland Gap. According to land survey maps from 1898, the brothers' cabin sat at the convergence of three natural formations: a limestone ridge to the north, an underground stream that surfaced briefly before disappearing into the mountainside, and a natural depression locals called the Witch's Cauldron, due to how fog gathered there in perfect circular patterns. The location violated several Appalachian folk taboos about home placement. It couldn't be seen from the main road, sat where three shadows meet at noon, and had no established path leading to it, only a winding trail that seemed to double back on itself. Martha Jenkins, a midwife and herbalist in the area, documented local superstitions in her household almanac. An entry from December 1897 reads, "The newcomers have built where no home should stand. The Blackwood place has been avoided for reasons the older families remember. The ground there doesn't hold prints. Seeds planted return nothing but pale, twisted sprouts. The brothers either don't know or don't care about such things." The brothers quickly established a routine in Cumberland Gap. They worked their night shifts, made weekly trips to town for supplies, and spent their remaining time at their remote cabin. Occasionally, Thomas would visit the county records office, researching old land claims and mining surveys. The clerk, Josephine Miller, noted in a letter to her cousin that he requested the oldest maps available and took extensive notes on the original survey of the region from the 1780s, particularly interested in areas marked unexplored or hazardous terrain. For nearly 6 years, the Hollow brothers maintained this quiet existence. Their only notable interaction with the town authorities came in 1899, when Thomas requested a permit to dig a well on their property. The request was approved, though County Surveyor William Hayes noted concerns about the proposed depth. Applicant insists on excavation exceeding 60 orders ft, far beyond water table requirements. When questioned, stated additional depth needed for temperature regulation, geological concerns noted, but permit granted based on property's remote location. The trouble began in August 1903. According to the Journal of Dr. William Forrester, the town's only physician. His entries, discovered decades later during a renovation of his former office in 1965, provide the only contemporary account of the strange events that preceded the brothers' disappearance. August 17, 1903. Called to the Collins farm after Esau. Young Peter Collins, age 19, was found wandering along Shawnee Trail in a state of extreme distress. The boy appears physically unharmed, but has not spoken a word since being found. His eyes track movement, and he responds to simple commands, but makes no attempt to communicate. Mrs. Collins reports he had gone hunting near Black Mountain Hollow. 3 days prior, I have administered a sedative and recommended rest. A week later, Dr. Forrester wrote, August 24, 1903, Peter Collins remains in the same condition. No physical cause can be determined. When shown a map of the area and asked to indicate where he had been hunting, he became extremely agitated, tearing the paper to pieces. Most concerning is his reaction to darkness. As the sun sets, his distress visibly increases. He must be restrained at night to prevent self-harm. Peter Collins was the eldest son of Robert Collins, a respected farmer whose property bordered the forests surrounding the hollow. According to family Bible records, Peter was engaged to be married to Emma Whitaker that November. He had been an active, well-regarded young man, church deacon, skilled hunter, and known for his excellent memory. His sudden affliction bewildered the community and marked the beginning of Cumberland Gap's darkest period. A previously unpublished interview with Emma Whitaker, conducted in 1968 by the Harlan Historical Society, sheds additional light on Peter's condition. The Peter that came back wasn't the same man. His eyes, they didn't focus right, like he was always looking at something just behind you. He'd flinch at shadows, and his skin was always cold to the touch, no matter how many blankets we piled on him. The doctor called it shock, but it was more than that. It was like part of him never came back from those woods. Throughout September, more unusual occurrences were reported. Livestock went missing from 3 farms bordering the hollow. Hunters reported an unusual silence in the woods, no birdsong, no scurrying animals. According to an account given by Franklin Moore, one of the last surviving residents from that era, interviewed by the Harlan Historical Society in 1968, it wasn't natural, that silence. You'd stand in those woods and hear nothing but your own heartbeat, like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. The Millbrook farm lost 6 sheep in a single night with no signs of predation or struggle. The gate to their pen was found neatly unlatched. Samuel Millbrook's journal entry from September 8th simply states they didn't run. Something led them away willingly. On September 12th, 12-year-old Sarah Thompson reported seeing a man made of shadows standing at the edge of her family's property, which bordered the forest near the hollow. Her father, Joseph Thompson, documented the incident in a letter to his brother in Louisville. Sarah's imagination has been overactive since her mother's passing, but this episode was different. She wasn't excited or seeking attention. She was terrified. Claims the figure stood watching our house for hours, and when she finally called to her older brother, it smiled with too many teeth before stepping backward into the trees. We found unusual boot prints in the soft earth, very narrow, extremely deep, as if the wearer carried impossible weight. Meanwhile, the Hollow brothers continued their normal routine, working nights, keeping to themselves, but people began to notice small changes. Thomas, once minimally conversational when necessary, now spoke to no one. Elijah began to sing softly to himself during shifts deep in the mine. Old folk songs that echoed eerily through the tunnels. Their foreman noted their work remained impeccable, but other miners increasingly refused to work anywhere near them. Jacob Whitley's journal from late September contains a troubling observation. The eastern shaft, where the Hollow men have been working alone, has yielded an unprecedented amount of coal. The company is pleased, but something doesn't add up. The volume they're extracting exceeds what should be physically possible for 2 men, even working double shifts. More concerning is the coal itself. Our buyers report it burns hotter and longer than any other from our mine, but produces a peculiar blue flame and leaves no ash, only a fine black powder that the wind won't disperse. On September 28th, a minor earthquake shook the region. It lasted only seconds and caused minimal damage, but several residents reported a peculiar phenomenon. At the exact moment of the tremor, every clock in town stopped for precisely 12 minutes before resuming. This detail appears in multiple personal accounts, including the diary of Reverend Howard Grant. Kivutke, Brother Simmons came to me in distress, claiming his pocket watch halted at 2:17, then suddenly jumped ahead to 2:29. I dismissed it until Mrs. Abernathy mentioned the same with her kitchen clock, and then realized my own timepiece showed the identical discrepancy, a sign perhaps that time itself is not as fixed as we believe. On October 12, 1903, something changed. The shift manager's log contains a curious entry. T and E Hollow failed to emerge from shaft 7 at end of shift. Search. Found nothing. Reappeared at mine entrance 3 hours later. Clothes soaked despite no water in that section. T Hollow requested 1 month leave effective immediately, granted due to exemplary work record. This incident coincided with another earthquake, this one too slight to be felt by most residents. However, instruments at the Cumberland Gap telegraph office recorded the disturbance. The operator, Miles Crawford, noted in his log, "Unusual seismic activity registered from direction of Black Mountain at approximately 4:13 a.m. Signal interrupted for exactly 3 minutes. When transmission resumed, experienced high-pitched tone on all lines for approximately 17 seconds. No one saw the brothers in town for the next 2 weeks. Smoke still rose from their cabin chimney visible from a distance, but they received no visitors, made no appearances." According to Dr. Forrester's journal, October 28, 1903. Sheriff Parsons consulted me regarding Thomas Hollow, who appeared at his office today with an unusual request. He asked for official documentation that would allow the exhumation of a grave. When asked whose grave, Hollow reportedly smiled and said, "No one is buried there yet." The request was denied. Sheriff reports Hollow's demeanor was unnaturally calm, eyes unfocused, as if looking at something beyond the room. The tension in Cumberland Gap continued to build. Peter Collins still had not spoken a single word. 3 more hunting dogs went missing after venturing too close to the hollow. And on November 2nd, a peculiar light was reported glowing from the Hollow brothers' cabin. Not the yellow warmth of lamplight, but a cold blue illumination that several witnesses described as pulsing like a heartbeat. Martin Weber, a German immigrant who worked as a night watchman for the railroad, provided the most detailed account of this phenomenon in a statement to Sheriff Parsons. "I was checking the eastern line when I saw it, a light, like nothing natural. It started at the chimney of the Hollow place and spread outward like water rippling. The trees around the cabin seemed to bend away from it. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. Most strange was the effect on my lantern. The flame froze in place, didn't flicker at all until the blue light faded. Then my lantern went out completely, though it had been freshly filled." November 3rd brought the first frost of the season, unusually early for the region. Farmers reported that the frost formed in bizarre patterns, perfect circles, intricate spirals, and what multiple sources described as writing in no language, known to man, appearing on barn doors and windows throughout the area, all oriented toward the direction of the hollow. On November 4th, Thomas Hollow made his final appearance in town. He visited the telegraph office and sent a message to an unknown recipient in Boston. The contents of this telegram were never recorded, as Operator Crawford claimed the paper burst into flames moments after transmission was complete. However, Crawford remembered the address: the Department of Anthropology at Miskatonic University, an institution that, according to subsequent investigation, has no historical record of existence. That same day, Elijah Hollow visited the home of Dr. Forrester. The doctor's journal contains a detailed account of this unexpected encounter. Elijah Hollow came to my door at dusk, the first time I have ever heard him speak without his brother present. He requested a specific medical text from my library, Harrington's Anatomical Divergences in Isolated Communities. When I asked his purpose, he smiled in a manner I can only describe as unsettling and said, "Confirmation, doctor. We need to be certain about the capacity of the human form." I denied his request, at which point he thanked me with unusual formality and left. Most troubling was his parting statement: "It matters little. We have found a better vessel." On November 5, 1903, everything changed. The Cumberland Gap Register's front page reported a fire at the Blue Diamond Mine that claimed the lives of 7 miners. Buried at the bottom of page 3 was a small note stating that Thomas and Elijah Hollow were found missing from their home with evidence of unusual disturbance. The sheriff formed a search party the following morning. The mine fire occurred in Shaft 7, the same area where the Hollow brothers had primarily worked. Company records indicate the fire began at exactly 3:17 a.m., though no miners were scheduled in that section. The cause was never determined. Rescue efforts were hampered by what survivors described as unnatural darkness that consumed their lantern light and an oppressive sensation like enormous pressure from all sides. Of the 12 men who entered to fight the fire and rescue potential survivors, only 5 emerged. According to Sheriff Parsons' official report found in county archives, search party of 12 men dispatched to Hollow residents and surrounding woods. Cabin found in state of extreme disarray, furniture overturned, personal belongings scattered. Most notable was the floor of the main room. Boards had been pried up, and a hole approximately 6 feet deep had been dug into the earth below the house. Contents of hole undetermined as search was interrupted by approach of severe storm. What the official report doesn't mention is what was found in that hole. But Dr. Forrester's journal fills in the gaps. November 6, 1903. Sheriff Parsons arrived at my door at dusk, visibly shaken. He described finding a collection of personal effects in the pit beneath the Hollow cabin, items belonging to various townspeople who had no connection to the brothers, a hairbrush belonging to Mrs. Whitaker, a child's toy from the Schmidt family, a pocket watch belonging to Judge Harmon. None of these people reported these items missing. More disturbing were the dozens of small cloth pouches containing what appeared to be soil from different locations, each meticulously labeled with names of households throughout the county. The doctor continues, most concerning was Parsons's description of markings carved into the earth walls of the pit. Symbols similar to those I've seen in certain anthropological texts discussing prehistoric cave paintings, but arranged in patterns suggesting a mathematical precision beyond primitive understanding. Parsons insisted I accompany him tomorrow to document these findings properly. I agreed, though with considerable reservation. The well the brothers had been permitted to dig in 1899 was nowhere to be found. Instead, the excavation beneath their cabin appeared to extend horizontally, with evidence of tunneling in multiple directions. The soil removed had not been piled. Outside, as would be expected, raising questions about where such a large volume of earth had been relocated. The search resumed the next day, expanding into the woods surrounding the cabin. It was then that they found what locals would later call the Circle, from a report filed by Deputy James Crawford, marked not for public record, and sealed until 1950. Approximately 400 yards north of the Hollow cabin, we discovered a clearing, not marked on any forest survey, perfectly circular, roughly 30 feet in diameter, where no vegetation grows. The soil appeared burned or scorched, though no evidence of fire was present. At the center was a crude stone altar. The items discovered upon this altar are described in Evidence Log 7, though I recommend these never be made public knowledge. Evidence Log number 7 has never been found. However, a personal letter from Deputy Crawford to his brother, discovered in family papers in 1966, offers a haunting glimpse. I cannot speak directly of what we found in that circle. I have taken an oath, as have all who were present. But I will say this, it defied natural law. Objects suspended without support. Metal melded with stone, organic matter in states of transformation that no science can explain. And everywhere those damnable markings, the same symbols found beneath the cabin, but larger, more elaborate. Sheriff ordered everything photographed, then destroyed on site. The photographer, Burke, refused to develop the plates, instead smashing them with a hammer and casting the pieces into the river. Smart man. What we do know is that the search party refused to return to the woods the following day. Sheriff Parsons noted in his final report that conditions have made further search untenable, despite fair weather being recorded that week. Curiously, around this time, Peter Collins suddenly began speaking again. According to Dr. Forrester's notes, November 9, 1903, called to Collins' farm, where Peter, silent for nearly 3 months, began speaking in early hours of morning. His words are troubling and often incoherent. He repeatedly mentions the brothers, who weren't brothers, and what they called up from the deep place. Most concerning is his insistence that they aren't missing. They're multiplying. Dr. Forrester's notes contain fragments of Peter's ramblings, transcribed verbatim. They found a door that shouldn't be opened, not brothers. Same man split across time, collector and collected. They need 13 to complete. The pattern. I was to be one, but they said my mind was too rigid, wouldn't bend properly. The others will be more suitable. They sing to what waits below. It listens. It's so hungry after sleeping so long. These ravings were dismissed as the product of trauma and possible brain injury. Yet inexplicably, over the next 3 days, 7 more residents of Cumberland Gap began exhibiting similar symptoms, periods of catatonia alternating with frenzied speech about the pattern and the awakening. All had one thing in common. They lived in homes where the Hollow brothers had collected soil samples. Peter Collins was indeed transferred but never arrived. The transport wagon was found abandoned on the Wilderness Road, the driver and patient nowhere to be found. This incident was briefly investigated, but ultimately filed away with dozens of other disappearances that plagued the region during that era of limited law enforcement resources. A conductor on the L&N Railroad, Oliver Blackburn, later claimed to have seen Peter Collins boarding a northbound train that same day. In his statement to Sheriff Parsons, it was Collins, no doubt, but he weren't alone. Tall man in black accompanied him, face hidden by his hat. The strange thing was how they moved perfectly in step, like they were connected by invisible strings. Collins's eyes were open, but empty, didn't respond when I called his name. By November 15th, the search for the Hollow brothers was officially closed. Their property was seized by the county for unpaid taxes, though records show they were paid in full. The cabin boarded up, and a peculiar town meeting was held at the Cumberland Gap courthouse. No official minutes from this meeting exist. However, a personal letter from Eleanor Simmons to her sister in Louisville, dated November 16th, offers a glimpse. The meeting last night was unlike anything I've witnessed. Sheriff Parsons spoke briefly about putting recent events behind us without ever specifying what events. Judge Harmon then proposed what he called a pact of silence for the good of the town. No vote was taken, but everyone understood. We are not to speak of the Hollow brothers again. Not to our children, not to outsiders, not even among ourselves. Most unsettling was watching Peter Collins's mother weeping silently in the back row while everyone pretended not to notice. Eleanor continues, "The strangest moment came when Reverend Grant attempted to lead a prayer. As soon as he spoke the words, 'Protect us from evil,' every lantern in the courthouse dimmed simultaneously. Judge Harmon immediately adjourned the meeting. As we filed out, I noticed something troubling. The courthouse clock showed 8:45, but the church bell had just struck midnight. And so Cumberland Gap collectively chose to forget. The Hollow brothers became unmentionable. Children were hushed if they asked about the boarded-up cabin. Outsiders who inquired were met with blank stares or deliberate misdirection. But forgetting isn't the same as resolution. In the weeks following the disappearance, subtle changes were noted throughout the community. The Cumberland Gap Register's edition of December 7, 1903, contains an unusually high number of typographical errors, letters inverted or substituted in patterns that, when mapped across the entire paper, form the same symbols found in the hollow excavation. The newspaper's editor, Harrison Wells, resigned his position the following day with no explanation and moved to Cincinnati. The Blue Diamond Mine's production records show an unexpected development. Coal extracted from Shaft 7, where the fire had occurred, suddenly tested at nearly twice the thermal efficiency of previous samples. The company expanded operations in that section despite workers' reluctance. 3 more miners disappeared in that shaft before year's end. Their disappearances, attributed to cave-ins, though no bodies were recovered. In the decades that followed, Cumberland Gap experienced what locals called the bad years. The mine suffered 3 major collapses between 1904 and 1910, claiming 46 lives. A tuberculosis outbreak in 1907 decimated the town's population. And most peculiarly, census records show an unusually high rate of disappearances, people who simply vanished without explanation, often after reporting strange dreams or feelings of being watched. School attendance records from 1904 to 1910 reveal an alarming pattern. Children born after November 1903 exhibited unusual developmental traits. According to teacher Mary Sinclair's notes, preserved in the Cumberland Gap School archives, the new generation seems altered somehow. They rarely speak among themselves. Their academic performance is remarkable, particularly in mathematics and sciences beyond our curriculum. Most troubling is their collective behavior. They move in unison without apparent signals, and during certain astronomical events, full moons, eclipses, they cannot be roused from deep, trance-like sleep. The Hollow Brothers' cabin remained untouched, slowly reclaimed by nature. In 1921, a lightning strike reportedly burned what remained to the ground. Though no fire department record exists to confirm this, the land was never resold or developed. What few knew was that in 1917, a geological survey team from the Kentucky Department of Mining had briefly investigated the area as a potential new coal seam location. Their official report simply states, "Area unsuitable for mining operations," due to unstable ground conditions. But the team's leader, Dr. Howard Mitchell, maintained a personal field journal that tells a different story. Instrumentation malfunctions in proximity to the target site. Magnetic compasses spin wildly. Film exposed despite tight containers. Most significant finding, temperature gradient inverts near original cabin site. Ground temperature increases with elevation rather than depth, reaching 57 degrees at surface level despite ambient air temperature of 34 degrees F. Recommendation: area should be restricted not due to instability, but phenomena I cannot explain, through any known geological process. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, the area remained largely undisturbed. Occasional hunters reported disorientation when venturing too close to the hollow, watches that ran backward, compasses that pointed to impossible directions, and most commonly, the unsettling sensation of being followed by something just out of sight. In 1931, a trapper named Wesley Harmon spent 3 days lost in the woods near the hollow, though he had hunted the area since boyhood. When finally found, he was severely dehydrated and suffering from exposure. His account, recorded by Dr. James Lewis at the Cumberland Gap Medical Center, described trees that moved when not watched directly, and ground that rearranged itself overnight, erasing any trail markers. Most disturbing was his insistence that he'd repeatedly seen the hollow cabin intact, and with smoke rising from its chimney, though it had allegedly burned down a decade earlier. In 1944, historian Margaret Fowler from the University of Kentucky began researching the industrial development of mining communities in Harlan County. Her work brought her to Cumberland Gap, where she encountered what she described in her notes as a wall of silence regarding certain historical events. Intrigued by the gaps in local records, she began investigating the Hollow brothers specifically. According to her research journal, April 18, 1944, the reluctance of locals to discuss the Hollow case borders on pathological. When pressed, elderly residents physically removed themselves from conversation. The town librarian claims all records from 1903 were destroyed in a flood, though no such flood is documented. Most telling was my conversation with Mr. Henry Crawford, son of the former deputy, who said only, "Some stories don't belong in books, Miss Fowler." Some were buried for good reason, Fowler persisted, tracking down former residents who had moved away from Cumberland Gap. Through these interviews, she began piecing together fragments of the story, including the existence of Dr. Forrester's journal and the sealed deputy's report. Her notes from May 1944 show increasing concern about her own research. Strange occurrences have become frequent enough that I must acknowledge them. My room at the boarding house has been searched twice, though nothing was taken. Mail I've sent to colleagues has never arrived. Most unsettling are the recurrent dreams. All was the same sequence: a circular clearing, a stone structure, symbols I cannot read but somehow understand. I wake each morning at precisely 3:17 a.m., regardless of when I retire. In her final research entry, dated June 30, 1944, Fowler wrote, "Tomorrow I visit the old Hollow site where the cabin once stood. Local resistance to this plan has been substantial. I've received everything from earnest pleas to thinly veiled threats. But I cannot complete this work without seeing the location firsthand. I've arranged for Jack Lamont to accompany me as a guide, though even he refuses to remain after sundown." Margaret Fowler never completed her book. University records indicate she took an indefinite leave of absence for health reasons. In July 1944, she reportedly moved to Arizona, where distant relatives claim she refused to discuss her time in Kentucky and burned all her research notes before her death in 1967. What happened on Fowler's expedition to the Hollow site? Jack Lamont, her guide, provided the only account documented in a sworn statement to the county sheriff. "We reached the old Hollow property around noon. Nothing there but forest now. Nature reclaimed it all. Dr. F. took photographs, measurements, soil samples, normal scientific stuff. Everything was fine until about 2 p.m. when she found something half buried near where the cabin's foundation would have been. A metal box, badly corroded. She insisted on opening it despite my warnings." Lamont continues, "Inside was just papers, as far as I could tell. Old, yellowed. She read for maybe 5 minutes, not speaking, then suddenly packed everything up and said we needed to leave immediately. Her demeanor completely changed, hands shaking, checking over her shoulder constantly. We were nearly back to town when she stopped suddenly, grabbed my arm and said, 'They're still here. They never left. The brothers are still watching.' She made me swear to never return to the Hollow before she'd continue walking." The story might have remained buried forever, if not for a highway expansion project in 1968. During the excavation near what was once the edge of the Hollow, workers uncovered a metal box containing what appeared to be personal effects, including a journal belonging to Elijah Hollow, the younger brother. The discovery caused considerable disruption to the construction project. According to foreman Russell Jenkins's daily log, excavator operator Vernon Mills refused to continue work after the box was found, claiming his machine fought against him when digging in that section. 3 more workers quit without notice the same day. County Historical Society representatives collected the artifacts, but odd equipment malfunctions continue. Electrical systems fail. Diesel engines stall. Project now 14 days behind schedule. The journal was briefly held by the Kentucky Historical Society before inexplicably disappearing from their archives in 1969. However, the archivist who initially cataloged the items made several notes about its contents, describing it as largely indecipherable, written in a combination of English and what appears to be a personalized cipher. The few legible passages included repeated references to the transaction, the exchange, and what waits in the spaces between. Most notably, the archivist recorded one complete passage. Thomas says we must not be greedy, says power requires patience. But I have seen what comes through when the conditions are right, and I cannot wait any longer. The soil holds memory, the darkness holds form, and soon we will hold everything. Catherine Benson, the archivist who processed the journal, resigned her position shortly after. In a letter to the Society's director, she wrote, "I can no longer continue this work in good conscience." The Hollow Journal is not merely a historical document. It is actively malignant. Since working with it, I've experienced cognitive disturbances, including time loss and recurring numerical fixations. Most alarmingly, I began finding pages of my own handwriting in perfect imitation of the journal's cipher, with no memory of producing them. I strongly recommend the item be secured away from public access, or preferably destroyed. Before the journal disappeared, several other items from the metal box were photographed and catalogued. These included a pocket watch with unusual modifications, additional hands and markings that appeared to track celestial movements rather than time, a set of surveyor's tools engraved with the same symbols found in the hollow excavation, 13 cloth pouches containing soil samples, only one of which was labeled Final Repository 13 of 13. A daguerreotype photograph showing what appeared to be the same man twice, posed side by side, though with subtle differences in facial features. In 1972, a speleological survey of the Black Mountain region discovered something unexpected, an extensive cave system running directly beneath where the hollow cabin had stood. The caves had unusual properties that defied conventional geology. Perfectly smooth walls in sections, consistent 57-degree Fahrenheit temperature regardless of depth, and most notably, an abundance of rare earth minerals not typically found in Kentucky limestone formations. Dr. Lawrence Hodge, who led the survey, published only one paper on the discovery before abandoning the research. In his field notes, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2010, he wrote, "The cave system appears artificial in sections, yet shows no tool marks or evidence of blasting. Certain chambers have perfect acoustic properties. A whisper at one end can be clearly heard 100 feet away. Most disturbing is the central chamber where all our electronic equipment failed simultaneously and team members reported intense disorientation and temporary memory loss. The local guide refused to enter this chamber, claiming it was where they called it through." In the years since, the legend of the Hollow Brothers has occasionally resurfaced. In 1982, a folklore student recorded interviews with elderly residents of Harlan County, capturing stories about the Hollow Men and those who called themselves brothers. These accounts often contradicted official records, suggesting the brothers arrived much earlier than 1897, that they had been seen in the area as early as the 1870s, without aging. Some claimed the brothers weren't siblings at all, but the same person somehow existing as two. As one 93-year-old former miner put it, they weren't born, they were called. Someone wished for help in those mines, made a bargain they didn't understand, and what came wasn't human. Not really. It just wore humanity like ill-fitting clothes. Edith Blackwood, last surviving member of the family that originally owned the land where the Hollow Brothers built. Their cabin gave a recorded interview to the Appalachian Oral History Project in 1983, just months before her death at age 97. Her testimony adds a troubling dimension to the story. "My grandfather told me things he wouldn't tell the authorities. Said before they sold that land, they found things on it that weren't right. A circle of stones that rearranged themselves overnight. A spring that ran clear during the day, but black as ink under moonlight. And once a man who came to the door, asking for shelter during a storm. A man whose footprints in the mud showed no toes, only smooth ovals like a doll's feet. she continued. Grandfather said when the Hollow men came to buy the land, he recognized the taller one. Swore it was the same strange visitor from 30 years earlier, unchanged, didn't age a day. He sold the land cheap just to be rid of the connection to it. Said some places aren't meant to be lived on, just lived under. The original sale documents, when examined by historical researchers in 1987, revealed an unusual clause not typical of property transactions from that era. The undersigned seller acknowledges that this transfer includes all mineral, subterranean, and atmospheric rights in perpetuity and forfeits any claim to discoveries or manifestations arising from the property, regardless of their nature or value. This specific language has no precedent in any other land transactions recorded in Harlan County during the period. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, the Hollow remained largely unexplored. The area was incorporated into the Cumberland Gap National Historical Park in 1985, but park rangers informally designated it as a low-priority patrol zone despite its proximity to hiking trails. Internal Park Service memos obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests reveal several incidents involving disoriented hikers who ventured too close to the area. Park Ranger David Martinez documented one such incident in 1989, responded to report of lost hikers near Hollow Ridge Trail. Located subjects approximately 2 miles from reported location, though they claimed not to have moved. Both were severely dehydrated, despite carrying adequate water supplies. Their watches had stopped at exactly 3:17, though they had been missing for approximately 7 hours. Both reported hearing mining sounds, pickaxes against stone, despite being miles from any active mining operation. Perhaps most disturbing is the recurring nature of certain phenomena around the Hollow. Every November 5th from 1904 to the present day, unusual electrical disturbances have been reported in Cumberland Gap. Power fluctuations, communication interruptions, and unexplained equipment failures. Modern monitoring has detected consistent electromagnetic anomalies centered on the former Hollow property on this date. Meteorological data shows another peculiarity. The area experiences significantly less rainfall than surrounding regions, with storms often dividing and circumventing the Hollow entirely. Local farmers have noted this pattern for generations, referring to it as the dry shadow or the thirsty ground. In 1997, a camping party of college students reportedly set up near the location, only to experience what they described as lost time. They set up camp at 4:30 p.m., and their next clear memory was being back in their cars at 7:01 a.m., with no recollection of the night. All their watches stopped at exactly midnight. Their story might have been dismissed as a prank or the result of intoxication, except for the physical evidence. Their camping equipment was found scattered across a half-mile radius, some items embedded in tree branches over 30 feet high. More concerning was the medical report from Cumberland Gap Regional Hospital, where all 6 students were treated for identical symptoms: elevated core temperatures of precisely 101.3 degrees Fahrenheit, dilated pupils unresponsive to light, and most peculiarly, magnetic resonance imaging showing unusual activity in the same region of their brains. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the neurologist who examined them, noted in her report, "The synchronized neural activity in all 6 patients defies conventional explanation. The pattern suggests some form of external entrainment of brainwaves, similar to what we might see with transcranial magnetic stimulation, but far more precise and affecting deeper brain structures. All patients report identical dreams since the incident, dreams of descending stairs in darkness while someone calls their names from below." The students' film and digital cameras contained no usable images from their expedition, only overexposed frames or corrupted files. However, audio recordings from one student's voice recorder captured something unusual. Beneath the static and distortion, analysis revealed 2 male voices, singing in perfect unison, performing what musicologists identified as a mining song from the 1880s that had never been commercially recorded. The Cumberland Gap Historical Society, established in 2001, has no exhibits or information about the Hollow brothers. When asked directly, staff members politely redirect to other aspects of local history. As recently as 2010, a local ordinance was quietly passed prohibiting archaeological excavation in the unmarked area that once contained the brothers' property, citing environmental concerns. What few outside researchers have discovered is a peculiar pattern in town records since 1903, the systematic removal or alteration of any documentation relating to the Hollow brothers. Library records show books with missing pages, specifically where mining history from that period would be covered. Land survey maps have sections redrawn with subtle differences from earlier versions. Even cemetery plots have been rearranged, headstones relocated or replaced. This pattern of erasure extends beyond physical records. Longtime residents exhibit what psychologists might call a collective blind spot, an inability to discuss the town's mining history in detail while completely omitting any mention of the Hollow brothers, even when directly questioned about them. Doctoral James Wilkins, a linguistics professor who conducted field research in Cumberland Gap in 2007, noted in his study of Appalachian oral traditions, the most remarkable aspect of the local dialect isn't what residents say, but what they don't say. When conversations approach certain topics, specifically the events of late 1903, or the area now marked as watershed protection land on modern maps, speakers employ a sophisticated array of linguistic diversions. They don't simply change the subject. They restructure entire narratives to circle around the omission without acknowledging it. This pattern appears in subjects ranging from age 18 to 97, suggesting an intergenerationally transmitted taboo. In 2012, an environmental survey team from Eastern Kentucky University installed seismic monitoring equipment throughout the region as part of a study on mining impact. The station nearest the Hollow recorded anomalous data, microseismic activity, occurring at regular 17-minute intervals precisely between 3:17 and 4:00 a.m. each day. More concerning were the sound recordings from the same equipment, described by the research team as rhythmic impacts consistent with mining operations, despite the area having no active mines for decades. The equipment failed completely after 3 weeks. When technicians retrieved it, they discovered all metal components had become magnetized with unusual polarity patterns. The lead researcher, Dr. Andrea Morrison, requested additional funding to place more sophisticated monitoring equipment, but the application was denied without explanation. What really happened to Thomas and Elijah Hollow? The official record says they simply disappeared, like so many others in those lawless days of early Appalachia. But the collective silence of an entire community suggests something far more disturbing, something so profoundly unsettling that even decades later the unspoken agreement holds. Some secrets are buried, not because they're forgotten, but because remembering is too dangerous. In the winter of 1965, during a particularly harsh January storm, an elderly man checked himself into the Pineville Medical Center, suffering from exposure. He had no identification and gave his name only as Thomas. The attending physician noted the man appeared much older than his claimed age of 98 and was in a state of extreme agitation, repeatedly muttering about the other one getting loose. The hospital records indicate he repeatedly attempted to leave his room during the night and was found on multiple occasions standing in the hallway facing the direction of Cumberland Gap, approximately 20 miles away. Nurses reported he would whisper to himself in what sounded like two distinct voices carrying on a conversation. Dr. Harold Jenkins, who treated the patient, made several unofficial notes in his personal journal. The man, calling himself Thomas, exhibits medical anomalies I cannot explain. His body temperature remains a constant 94.6 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of external factors. X-rays show unusual density in his skeletal structure, more consistent with mineral deposits than human bone. Most disturbing is his blood work, hemoglobin levels, and cellular structures, unlike anything in medical literature. If I didn't know better, I'd say he isn't entirely human. The man died 3 days later. No next of kin was ever located. The hospital records indicate his personal effects included only the clothes he wore and a small cloth pouch containing soil. The pouch was labeled Cumberland Gap, 1903. His body was never claimed and was buried in an unmarked grave. What the official death certificate doesn't mention, but Dr. Jenkins documented privately, was that the body exhibited unprecedented rates of decomposition, essentially collapsing into unidentifiable organic material within hours of death, despite refrigeration in the morgue. The doctor also noted that all medical personnel who had direct contact with the body subsequently experienced identical symptoms: insomnia, orientation toward specific compass directions while sleeping, and vivid dreams of descending staircases. In 1978, construction workers expanding the Pineville Cemetery discovered an empty coffin where records indicated Thomas had been buried. The coffin's interior contained only a fine layer of black powder and another cloth pouch of soil. This discovery was not made public, and county records regarding the burial were subsequently altered to show a different location. Throughout the subsequent decades, reports occasionally surface of peculiar encounters in the region surrounding Cumberland Gap. Hikers describe meeting tall, thin men on remote trails who ask unusual questions about the depth of caves or the composition of soil. Workers in the few remaining mining operations sometimes report hearing two voices singing in perfect harmony from abandoned tunnels. And most commonly, residents describe dreams of being watched by identical figures standing perfectly still at the edges of their property. In 2015, a University of Tennessee archaeology student named Michael Reynolds became interested in the Hollow case after discovering references to it in his great-grandfather's journal. Despite warnings from locals, he conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys of the area where the cabin allegedly stood. His findings were never formally published, but emails to his faculty advisor, recovered after his disappearance in 2016, described something unusual. The subsurface imaging shows what appears to be a structure extending at least 300 feet below the surface, far deeper than any mining operation would have reached in the early 1900s. The formation has perfect symmetry and appears to be hollow with walls of unusual density. Most strange is that when we compared scans taken 3 days apart, the internal dimensions had changed, as if the structure is slowly expanding. Reynolds was last seen entering the Cumberland Gap National Historical Park on November 5, 2016. His backpack and research equipment were found neatly arranged in a perfect circle near the former hollow property. Despite extensive searches, no other trace of him has been discovered. To this day, residents of Harlan County report unusual phenomena near the old hollow: compasses that spin without finding north, watches that run backward, the feeling of being followed by something just out of sight. Hunting dogs still refuse to enter certain parts of the forest, and locals still warn their children, never go into the hollow after dark. Never respond if you hear someone calling your name from among the trees. And never ever speak about the brothers who once lived there. Because some stories don't end when we stop telling them. Some are just waiting patiently for someone to speak them back into existence. Modern scientific equipment occasionally detects anomalies in the region, unexplained radiation signatures, localized magnetic field distortions, and what one researcher termed temporal inconsistencies, where atomic clocks briefly desynchronize when placed within certain areas of the hollow. These phenomena remain largely undocumented in peer-reviewed literature, researchers often abandoning their studies after preliminary investigations. What is documented, however, is the unusual demographic pattern of Cumberland Gap in the century following the Hollow brothers' disappearance. Census data shows that despite economic hardship and the general population decline typical of Appalachian mining towns, Cumberland Gap has maintained an eerily consistent population number. Exactly 1,013 residents recorded in every census from 1910 to 2010, despite births, deaths, and migration that should have altered this figure. More unsettling is the town's unusually high rate of identical twins, 317% above the national average, according to a 2008 medical study that was subsequently retracted without explanation. Local physicians have noted that these twins often exhibit synchronized behaviors and report identical dreams, particularly during adolescence. The Blue Diamond Mine, which closed officially in 1957, shows signs of activity in periodic aerial surveys. Heat signatures inconsistent with an abandoned facility, particularly around Shaft 7, where the Hollow brothers primarily worked. Satellite. Imagery occasionally captures unusual light emissions from the sealed entrances, particularly around the anniversary of the brothers' disappearance. In 2019, digital mapping of the region revealed another anomaly. The precise area where the Hollow cabin once stood appears differently depending on when it's viewed. Daytime satellite images show only dense forest, while night imaging, occasionally, reveals what appears to be a clearing and small structure. When analysts attempted to reconcile these discrepancies, they discovered that digital files containing these images become corrupted at precisely 3:17 a.m. on the day they're processed, regardless of the computer system used. Some say that if you stand at the edge of Cumberland Gap as the sun sets and listen carefully, you might hear distant singing, old mining songs in a voice that sounds simultaneously like one man and two. But locals know better than to listen too long. They know some melodies are better left unheard. They know why no one ever speaks of the Hollow brothers. They remember what happens to those who do. A folk tale persists among the oldest families of Cumberland Gap, passed down in whispers and never committed to writing. It tells of a miner in the 1890s who, trapped in a cave-in and facing certain death, made a desperate bargain with something that spoke to him from the darkness. He asked for help, for salvation. What answered wasn't divine or human, but something that had waited in the deep places since before mankind walked upright. The bargain was simple. It would save him, would even help him prosper, in exchange for being allowed to experience the world above. But it needed a vessel, or rather, vessels. The miner agreed without understanding the full implications. He was saved, emerged unharmed from a collapse that should have killed him. But from that day forward, his shadow sometimes moved independently of his body. And sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, his reflection showed a different face. The transformation was gradual, the entity learning, adapting, dividing, until one day the original miner vanished completely. And in his place were two brothers who looked almost, but not quite, identical. Brothers who purchased land above the place where the bargain had been struck. Brothers who began preparing for something much larger than themselves. Perhaps this is merely a story created to explain the unexplainable. Or perhaps somewhere in the darkness beneath Cumberland Gap, something is still waiting, still watching, still remembering the taste of surface air and human form, something that knows patience because it measures time in millennia rather than moments. Whatever the truth, the Hollow remains. A place where reality seems thinner, where what should be solid sometimes shifts, and where the boundary between one world and another occasionally trembles. And in Cumberland Gap, when the wind blows from the direction of Black Mountain, when children have nightmares of descending stairs, when timepieces briefly hesitate at 3:17, the old families remember without speaking. They remember the silence that saved them once. They remember the curse of the Hollow brothers,